Speak English if you can. The command echoed through the glass lobby of Weston Global. Lila froze. She was 13. Her hands still clutched a pencil and a notebook filled with language drills. Charles Weston, CEO of the world's largest language corporation, stared down at her with pure contempt. Employees laughed. Some raised their phones to record, but Lila didn't run. She calmly wrote on her paper, "Do you want British or American accent?" The laughter stopped. The maid's daughter had just challenged the man who built an empire on words. Her mother Evelyn stood frozen in the corner, terrified, proud. Days later, this girl would bring him to his knees. When money screams, who listens to the language of the heart? A child was about to silence an entire building. Evelyn had worked at Weston Global for 6 years. 6 years of polishing floors no one noticed. 6 years of scrubbing marble that reflected everyone's face but hers. 6 years of invisible hands keeping a glass empire spotless. She and Lila lived in a cramped room tucked behind the laundry facility. The walls were paper thin. The single window faced a brick wall. The ceiling leaked when it rained. But every night, under a flickering bulb that buzzed like a dying insect, Lila studied. Her desk was a cardboard box. Her chair was a folded towel. Her world was a worn leather notebook. Her grandfather had been a language teacher in a small village. Before cancer took him, he pressed that notebook into her hands. On the first page, in fading blue ink, he had written, "Language is a bridge, not a weapon." Inside were notes in 5 languages: English with its sharp edges, French with its melody, Japanese with its precision, Italian with its warmth, Spanish with its fire. Lila taught herself from those pages. She traced each character with her fingertip until the ink smudged. She whispered phrases into the hum of washing machines at midnight. She learned the rhythm of words the way others learned lullabies. In the mornings, while her mother mopped hallways, Lila sat in stairwells and practiced pronunciation. She listened to executives pass by, speaking in different tongues. She absorbed accents like a sponge absorbs water. One Tuesday morning, she found Charles Weston's son sitting alone in a corridor. He was 10. His French textbook lay open. His eyes were red. "I hate this," he muttered. "I'll never get it right." His tutor had canceled. Again. Lila approached quietly. She pointed to a sentence in his book. "May I?" she asked softly in English. The boy looked up, surprised, then nodded. She sat beside him, explained the difference between tu and vous, showed him how to shape his mouth for the R sound, made grammar feel like a game instead of a punishment. He laughed. Actually laughed. "You're better than my tutor," he said. That's when the elevator doors opened. Charles Weston stepped out. He saw his son, smiling, learning. From a girl in a faded dress and worn shoes, his face turned to stone. "What is this?" His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It cut through the air like broken glass. Evelyn came running, her mop bucket clattering behind her. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Weston. She didn't mean any harm. Please, I don't want the help interfering with my son's education." His eyes never left Lila. "Do you understand what boundaries are?" Lila stood slowly. She met his gaze, calm, unflinching. "I was just helping him with pronunciation, sir. I didn't ask for your help." He turned to his assistant. "Have them removed. Today." The words fell like an axe. Evelyn's hands trembled as she packed their few belongings an hour later. A thin blanket, 2 changes of clothes, a photo of Lila's grandfather, the notebook. Lila didn't cry. She sat on the edge of the narrow cot and watched her mother fold their life into a single bag. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Evelyn whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I failed you. I should have kept you away from them." Lila shook her head. She opened the notebook to a page her grandfather had underlined twice. "The most powerful voice is the one they don't expect to hear." She traced the words with her finger. "You didn't fail me, Mom. He just doesn't know how to listen yet." As they walked toward the service exit, Lila paused. She turned back toward the glass lobby where Charles stood with his back to them, phone pressed to his ear. Untouchable. Unreachable. She pressed her small palm against the cold glass door. Slowly, deliberately, she mouthed one word: "Wait." Evelyn gently pulled her daughter's hand away. But Lila's eyes stayed locked on that building, on the man who had thrown them out without a second thought. Outside, the city roared. Taxis honked. People in expensive suits rushed past without seeing them. To the world, they were invisible. Evelyn sat on a bench near the bus stop, head buried in her hands. Lila sat beside her. She opened the notebook one more time, ran her fingers over her grandfather's handwriting. And quietly, in a voice soft as silk but strong as steel, she made a promise. "They don't listen, Mom. I'll make them listen." Her mother looked up, saw something in her daughter's eyes she'd never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, determination. The kind that bends iron, the kind that moves mountains, the kind that makes the powerful forget they ever had power at all. 3 days later, Weston Global prepared to sign contracts with 5 international partners. It was the deal of the decade. Executives from France, Japan, Italy, Spain, and Germany gathered in the top-floor conference room. The air smelled of leather and ambition. Charles stood at the head of the table, confident as always. Translators sat at the edges with headsets. Assistants hovered with tablets and documents. Everything was perfect. Until the translation software crashed. The screen went black. The interpreters panicked. One of them fumbled with cables. Another frantically rebooted the system. "How long?" Charles snapped. 10 minutes, sir. Maybe 15. He clenched his jaw. The French delegate checked his watch. The Japanese partner whispered to his assistant. Time was money. Silence was failure. "Get it fixed. Now." In the chaos, the head of building services sent an emergency cleaning crew upstairs. The room needed to look flawless when the system came back online. Evelyn was called in. She arrived with her cart, spray bottles, rags, a mop, and Lila. Evelyn had no choice. She couldn't leave her daughter alone in the shelter where they were staying. So Lila came. Quiet. Invisible. Carrying her notebook like always. "Stay in the corner," Evelyn whispered. "Don't make a sound." Lila nodded. She sat near the window while her mother wiped down the glass table. The executives spoke in low, frustrated voices. Lila listened. She heard the French delegate complain about contract terms in his language. The Japanese partner expressed concern about delivery timelines. The Italian representative questioned profit margins. None of them knew the others understood. Lila kept her head down, but her ears were wide open. Then she saw it. A printout on the floor, half crumpled. Someone had knocked it off the table during the technical scramble. She bent down to pick it up. It was a translation of the contract terms, English to French, and it was wrong. The word trust had been translated as thrust. A tiny mistake, a single letter. But in a legal document, it changed everything. Lila's heart raced. She looked at her mother, who was focused on cleaning. She looked at the executives, who were too busy arguing to notice her. She pulled out a pencil. Carefully in the margin, she wrote the correction in French, "Confiance pas poussée." She placed the paper back on the table. Then she moved to another document. This one had an error in the Japanese section. A decimal point in the wrong place. She corrected it. Quietly. Precisely. The Italian version had a grammar mistake that flipped the meaning of a clause. She fixed that too. By the time the system came back online, Lila had corrected 4 documents. She sat back down in the corner. Silent. The meeting resumed. Charles began walking through the terms. But when the French delegate picked up his copy, he paused. "Wait," he said in accented English. "This correction here. Who made this?" Everyone looked up. "What correction?" Charles asked, irritation creeping into his voice. The delegate pointed to the handwritten note in the margin. "Someone fixed a translation error. It was wrong before. This is correct now." The Japanese partner lifted his copy. "Mine too. The numbers were off. Someone adjusted them." Charles's face darkened. "Who touched these documents?" All eyes turned to the cleaning crew, to Evelyn, to Lila. Evelyn went pale. I didn't. It was me." Lila's voice was small but clear. She stood up. Charles stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. "You—" "The translations had errors," Lila said simply. "I corrected them." The room fell silent. The French delegate leaned forward. "You speak French?" "Yes, sir." "Say something." Lila took a breath. Then, in flawless Parisian French, she said, "Your contract stated thrust instead of trust. In legal terms, that would have implied force rather than confidence. It could have voided the agreement." The delegate's eyes widened. He looked at Charles, then back at Lila. "How old are you?" 13. "Who taught you?" "My grandfather. And myself." The Japanese partner set down his pen. "Can you speak Japanese?" Lila switched languages without hesitation. Her pronunciation was clean, natural. She explained the decimal error in terms even a child could understand. The Japanese man laughed in disbelief. "Her Japanese is better than my translator's." Charles stood frozen. His carefully controlled world was unraveling in front of international clients. And the thread pulling it apart was a girl he'd thrown out 3 days ago. The Italian representative smiled. "Can you help us finish this meeting?" Charles opened his mouth to refuse, but the German partner cut him off. "I agree. Let the girl stay." "She's not. She just saved us from signing flawed contracts," the French delegate said coolly. "I'd say she's earned a seat at this table." Charles looked at Evelyn. She was trembling, terrified of what would happen next. Then he looked at Lila. She stood there in a dress 2 sizes too big. Shoes with worn soles. A notebook clutched to her chest, but her eyes didn't waver. "Let me try," she said quietly. The room waited. Charles exhaled through his nose. His pride wrestled with his logic. Finally, he stepped aside. "Fine. Sit." Lila walked to the table. No microphone, no preparation. Just her voice and the weight of 5 languages resting on her shoulders. She sat down, opened her notebook, and began. She translated between the partners in real time, switching languages mid-sentence when needed, clarifying, connecting, building bridges with words the way her grandfather had taught her. The delegates stopped checking their watches. They started listening. By the end of the session, all 5 contracts were signed. Charles stood at the window watching the city below. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Behind him, the French delegate shook Lila's hand. "You have a gift, young lady." Lila smiled. "Thank you. But it's not a gift. It's practice." As the partners filed out, Charles finally turned around. He looked at the girl who had corrected his empire's mistakes with a pencil. "Who taught you to do that?" he asked. Lila met his eyes. Someone who believed words could heal instead of hurt. The room emptied. Evelyn stood by the door, tears streaming down her face. And Charles Weston realized something he'd never considered before. The most powerful person in the room wasn't always the one in charge. Sometimes it was the one nobody expected to speak. The contracts were supposed to be finalized by end of week. Charles had assigned his senior legal team to review every clause, every number, every comma. Nothing could go wrong. But Lila saw what they missed. She wasn't supposed to be there. After the meeting, Charles had awkwardly offered Evelyn her job back. Not an apology, just a silent nod and a key to their old room. Evelyn had cried the entire way back to the building. Lila had simply opened her notebook and kept studying. 2 days later, during another preparatory session, the Italian delegate requested a final review of the profit-sharing terms. His assistant printed out copies in Italian, English, and Spanish for cross-reference. Lila was sitting in the corner again, invisible by habit, present by necessity. Her mother was cleaning the coffee station when Lila noticed something in the Italian document: a percentage. In the English version, it read 0.5% quarterly dividend. In the Italian version, it read 5% dividendo trimestrale. Her heart stopped. She read it again. It wasn't a translation error. It was deliberate. Someone had moved the decimal point. Someone had inflated the number by 10 times. And if the Italian partner signed that version, Weston Global would lose millions over the contract's lifetime. Lila's hands trembled. She looked around the room. Charles was on a phone call. The delegates were reviewing other sections. The legal team was arguing over liability clauses. No one was paying attention to the percentages. Except her. She stood up slowly. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "Excuse me." Her voice was barely a whisper. No one heard. She tried again. Louder. "Excuse me." Charles glanced over, annoyed. "What is it?" "There's an error. We have a legal team for that. It's in the numbers." Lila said, her voice steadier now. "The Italian version doesn't match the English." The Italian delegate looked up. "What do you mean?" Lila walked to the table. She placed both documents side by side. "Here," she pointed. "In English it says 0.5%, but in Italian it says 5%. The decimal is missing." The room went still. The Italian representative leaned forward. He studied the pages. His face changed. "She's right." Charles snatched the documents. His eyes scanned the lines. Once. Twice. "How did this happen?" His voice was ice. The head translator, a man named Richard, stepped forward. "It's possible the software—" "No," Lila interrupted softly. "It's not the software." Everyone turned to her. "I checked the original file yesterday when I was helping organize papers. The English version was correct. This change happened after that." Charles's jaw tightened. "What are you saying?" "Someone changed it manually." The air in the room shifted. Accusation hung like smoke. Richard's face went red. "That's absurd. Why would anyone—" "Because 5% of this deal is worth a lot of money," the Japanese partner said quietly. "Especially if someone is getting a commission based on the terms they negotiate." All eyes turned to Richard. He laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. I've worked here for 8 years. You're going to believe a child over me." Charles didn't answer. He pressed the intercom. "Security. Conference room. Now." "Wait," Richard said, his voice rising. "You can't be serious. She's just—" "Just what?" Lila asked. Her voice was calm, unnervingly calm. "Just a maid's daughter, just someone you didn't think would notice." Richard's mouth opened, closed. Charles pulled up the document history on his laptop. Timestamps, edit logs, digital fingerprints. The last modification had been made from Richard's account, at 11 p.m. the night before, long after everyone else had gone home. Richard's face drained of color. "I can explain." "Don't." Charles's voice could have frozen fire. "Security will escort you out. Legal will contact you regarding breach of contract and fraud charges." 2 guards entered. Richard didn't resist. He just stared at Lila as he was led away. "You have no idea what you've done," he muttered. Lila met his eyes. "I know exactly what I did. I protected people who trusted you." The door closed. The room exhaled. The Italian delegate looked at Lila with something close to awe. "You just saved us from a disaster." "I just read carefully," she said. "No." The Japanese partner shook his head. "You did more than read. You understood context. You saw intent. That's not translation. That's wisdom." Charles stood by the window. His reflection was a shadow against the glass. "How did you catch it?" he asked without turning around. "My grandfather taught me that numbers are a language too," Lila said. "And when they don't match, someone is lying." Charles turned to face her. For the first time since they'd met, he didn't look at her with contempt or confusion. He looked at her with something close to respect. "What else did your grandfather teach you?" Lila thought for a moment. "He said that the quietest people often see the most. Because they're not busy talking. They're busy listening." The French delegate smiled. "Your grandfather was a wise man." "He was." Charles walked to the table. He picked up the corrected documents, studied them like he was seeing them for the first time. "You could have stayed silent," he said. "After what I did to you and your mother. You could have let us sign the wrong version. Let us lose the money. It would have been understandable." Lila shook her head. "That's not who I am." "Then who are you?" She looked at him. Really looked at him. I'm someone who believes words and numbers should build things, not break them. Silence filled the room like water. The Spanish delegate, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Mr. Weston, I think you should hire this girl. Charles almost laughed. She's 13. Then make her a consultant, an advisor. I don't care what you call it. The man gestured to the documents. She just did in 10 minutes what your entire legal team missed in 3 days. Charles looked at Lila, then at Evelyn, who stood frozen by the coffee station, tears streaming down her face. I'll think about it, he said. But Lila saw it in his eyes. He'd already decided. After the meeting, as the partners filed out, the Italian delegate paused beside her. Thank you, he said quietly in Italian. You didn't just save money. You saved trust. Lila smiled. That's all my grandfather wanted, for language to build trust. The man nodded. Then he was gone. The room emptied until only Charles, Lila, and Evelyn remained. Charles stood at the head of the table, hands in his pockets. You taught me something today, he said. What's that? Lila asked. That the people I've ignored my whole life might be the ones seeing everything I miss. He walked to the door, paused. Your grandfather was right. Silence is a language, and I'm starting to think I need to learn it. Then he left. Evelyn rushed to Lila and pulled her into a hug so tight it hurt. You were so brave, she whispered. Lila hugged her mother back. I just did what Grandpa taught me. He'd be so proud of you. I hope so. They stood there for a long moment, mother and daughter, in a room that had once thrown them out. Now they were the ones holding it together. Outside, the city glittered in the fading light. And somewhere in that glass tower, a man who had built an empire on words began to realize he'd forgotten how to listen. Until a 13-year-old girl reminded him. The news spread through Weston Global like wildfire. The maid's daughter who spoke 5 languages, the girl who caught fraud, the child who saved millions. Some employees whispered in admiration, others in disbelief, a few in resentment. But Charles said nothing. He watched. He observed. And for the first time in years, he questioned himself. A week later, crisis struck again. The Japanese partner, Mr. Takahashi, called an emergency meeting. His tone was cold, formal, the kind of tone that precedes a canceled contract. There's been a misunderstanding, he said through the phone. We need to discuss this in person, today. Charles's stomach dropped. Takahashi was their largest investor. Losing him would collapse the entire deal. Within 2 hours, Takahashi arrived with his legal team. They sat across from Charles in the main conference room. The air was thick with tension. We reviewed the cultural sensitivity clauses, Takahashi said in English, his accent precise. And we find them insufficient. Charles leaned forward. We followed every protocol, every standard. Protocols are not understanding. Takahashi's eyes were hard. Your team translated our concerns, but they did not hear them. I don't understand. That, Takahashi interrupted, is exactly the problem. The translator fumbled trying to soften the blow, but the damage was done. Takahashi stood to leave. Wait. Everyone turned. Lila stood in the doorway. She wasn't supposed to be there. But Evelyn had been called to clean the room before the meeting, and once again Lila had come along. Please, Lila said quietly. May I try? Charles looked at her. Exhausted. Desperate. He nodded. Lila walked to the table. She bowed slightly to Takahashi the way her grandfather had taught her Japanese culture demanded. Then she spoke. Not in English. In Japanese. Her words were soft, respectful. She asked permission to understand his concerns. Not to defend. Not to argue. Just to listen. Takahashi's expression shifted. Surprise, then curiosity. He responded in Japanese. His voice was still firm, but the edge had softened. Lila listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush to translate. She let him speak until he was finished. Then she turned to Charles. He's not angry about the contract terms, she said in English. He's hurt. Hurt, Charles repeated, confused. Yes. Lila looked back at Takahashi, then continued. In Japanese culture, business isn't just about numbers. It's about trust, respect, connection. Your team treated his concerns like checklist items. They translated his words, but they didn't honor his feelings. She paused. He feels like you see him as a transaction, not a partner. The room was silent. Charles stared at her. Then at Takahashi, who nodded slowly. She understands, Takahashi said in English. Finally, someone understands. Lila turned to him. May I ask what would help? Takahashi thought for a moment. Then he spoke in Japanese again, longer this time, more detailed. Lila translated as he spoke, not word for word, but meaning for meaning, feeling for feeling. He wants to know that you value his company's philosophy, that you respect the way they do business, that this partnership isn't just about profit, it's about building something that honors both cultures. Charles sat back. He looked at his legal team, at his translators. They'd given him facts. Lila had given him truth. How do I show him that? Charles asked quietly. Lila smiled. By listening. Really listening. Not to respond, but to understand. She gestured to Takahashi. Ask him about his company's history, about what matters to him. Not as a negotiation, as a conversation. Charles hesitated. He'd built an empire on control, on winning, but right now, control was slipping through his fingers. He took a breath, and he asked. For the next hour, the meeting transformed. Charles asked questions. Takahashi answered. Lila translated not just the words, but the weight behind them, the pauses, the emotions, the unspoken meanings. She became a bridge, not between languages, between hearts. By the end, Takahashi was smiling. He stood and bowed to Charles, then to Lila. Thank you, he said in Japanese, for teaching him to listen. Lila bowed back. It's what my grandfather would have wanted. Takahashi left with his team. The tension had dissolved like morning fog. Charles stood by the window staring at nothing. You taught me something today, he said without turning around. Lila waited. I thought language was about words, grammar, syntax, accuracy. He finally looked at her. But you showed me it's about something else. What's that? Connection. He shook his head slowly. I've built a company that teaches 50 languages, and I forgot the most important one. Which one? Listening. Lila smiled. It's never too late to learn. Charles walked to the table, picked up a pen, wrote something on a notepad, then handed it to her. It was a single word, listen. Can you teach me? He asked. Not the languages, the listening. Lila looked at the word, at the man who had mocked her, dismissed her, thrown her and her mother out, and she saw something she hadn't seen before. Humility. Yes, she said. I can teach you. Evelyn watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Her daughter hadn't just translated words, she'd translated a heart. Over the next few days, something changed at Weston Global. Charles started attending meetings differently. He asked more questions, paused more often, stopped interrupting. Employees noticed, partners noticed, and slowly the man who had built an empire on words began learning the language he'd ignored his entire life. The language of presence. One afternoon, Charles called Lila to his office. I want you to join a project, he said. We're launching a global communication initiative, teaching businesses how to bridge cultural divides. I want you to help design it. Lila's eyes widened. Me. You. He smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. You've taught me more in 2 weeks than I've learned in 20 years. I think the world needs to hear what you know. Lila looked at the notebook in her hands. Her grandfather's handwriting. His wisdom. He always said silence speaks louder than noise, she said softly. Then let's teach people to listen to it. Lila nodded. And in that moment, a girl who had been invisible became the voice the world needed to hear. Not because she spoke 5 languages, but because she understood the one language everyone forgets. The language of the heart. 3 weeks after the meeting with Takahashi, something unexpected happened. A video went viral. Someone had recorded Lila translating during one of the sessions. 30 seconds of her switching seamlessly between English, French, and Japanese. Her voice calm, her presence steady. The caption read, 13-year-old Maid's daughter negotiates $1 million deal in 5 languages. Within 48 hours it had 5 million views, then 10 million, then 20. News outlets picked it up. Bloggers wrote about it. Social media exploded with comments. This is what real intelligence looks like. She's more articulate than most adults I know. Why isn't she in school? Someone give this girl a scholarship. The world had discovered Lila, and Charles knew he had to respond. He called a press conference. Reporters filled the lobby of Weston Global. Cameras lined the walls. Microphones crowded the podium. Charles stepped forward. Lila and Evelyn stood to the side, nervous and uncertain. 3 weeks ago, Charles began, I made a mistake. The room quieted. I dismissed someone because of who I thought they were. I judged them by their position, their background, their appearance. He paused. I was wrong. He turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Evelyn Chen has worked for this company for 6 years. She has been nothing but dedicated, hard-working, and kind. And I treated her like she was invisible. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Charles said, looking directly at her. You deserved better. And so did your daughter. He gestured to Lila. Lila Chen is 13 years old. She taught herself 5 languages from a notebook her grandfather left her. She has saved this company from legal disasters, financial fraud, and broken partnerships. Not because she was paid to, but because she believes in something I'd forgotten. He looked out at the cameras. She believes that language is meant to build bridges, not walls. The room was silent. Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Global Voices Initiative, a program designed to teach businesses, schools, and communities how to communicate across cultural and linguistic divides. And Lila Chen will be our lead consultant. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But that's not all, Charles continued. We're also launching the Nonverbal Advocacy Fund, a scholarship program for children from underserved communities who want to learn languages. Because talent doesn't care about your zip code. And neither should opportunity. Applause erupted. Lila stood frozen, overwhelmed. Charles stepped aside and gestured for her to approach the microphone. She hesitated, looked at her mother. Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. Lila walked to the podium. The microphone was too high. Someone adjusted it. She looked out at the sea of faces, cameras, lights, strangers, and she thought of her grandfather. My grandfather used to say, she began softly, that language is how we make each other feel heard. Her voice was quiet, but the room leaned in. For a long time I felt invisible. My mom and I lived in a small room. We didn't have much. People didn't look at us. They looked past us. She paused. But my grandfather's notebook taught me something. It taught me that being silent doesn't mean you have nothing to say. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones paying the most attention. She glanced at Charles. Mr. Weston didn't listen to me at first, and I don't blame him. The world teaches us to listen to power, to titles, to money. But my grandfather taught me to listen to people, to their tone, their pauses, the things they don't say out loud. Her voice grew steadier. Language isn't just about speaking. It's about understanding. It's about making someone feel like they matter, like their voice counts, even if it's shaking, even if it's small. The room was silent. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here, Lila admitted. I don't have a degree. I don't have experience. All I have is a notebook, and the belief that everyone deserves to be heard. She looked directly into the camera. If you've ever felt invisible, I want you to know something. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You don't need permission to speak. You just need the courage to start. Tears streaked down faces in the crowd. A reporter stood. What do you want to do with this opportunity? Lila thought for a moment. I want to help people like my mom. People who work hard but get ignored. I want to teach kids that language isn't a luxury. It's a tool. And tools are meant to be shared. Another reporter. What would you say to young people watching this? Lila smiled. Don't wait for someone to give you a microphone. Your voice is already enough. The applause was deafening. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Lila just stood there, a 13-year-old girl in a simple dress, holding a worn notebook. And the world listened. After the press conference, messages poured in from around the globe. Schools offered scholarships. Organizations wanted partnerships. Families shared their own stories of feeling unseen. Lila's inbox overflowed. But the message that mattered most came from a small village across the ocean. It was from her grandfather's former students. He would be so proud. You became the bridge he always dreamed of. That night in their small apartment, Lila sat with her mother. Did I do okay? She asked. Evelyn pulled her close. You did more than okay, sweetheart. You gave people hope. Lila opened the notebook, ran her fingers over the faded ink. I miss him, she whispered. I know. But he's still here. In every word you speak. In every person you help. Lila nodded. Outside the city hummed with life. And somewhere in that noise a quiet voice had finally been heard. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. 1 year later, Lila stood backstage at the International Language Summit in Geneva. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, from anticipation. The auditorium held 2,000 people. Linguists, educators, business leaders, diplomats. All gathered to discuss the future of global communication. And they had invited her to speak. Evelyn adjusted Lila's collar, her eyes shining with pride. You ready? Lila nodded. I think so. Your grandfather would be so proud. I hope I make him proud today. You already have, sweetheart. Every single day. A stage manager appeared. 2 minutes, Miss Chen. Lila took a deep breath, clutched her grandfather's notebook to her chest one last time, then handed it to her mother for safekeeping. Time to let them hear him through me, she whispered. The lights dimmed. The crowd settled. Charles Weston walked onto the stage first. Over the past year, he had transformed. His company had shifted focus from profit first to people first. The Global Voices initiative now operated in 43 countries. A year ago, Charles said into the microphone, I stood in front of cameras and apologized. I apologized for being blind, for being arrogant, for forgetting that leadership means listening. He paused. Today I stand before you not as a CEO but as a student. Because the person who taught me the most important lesson of my life is about to take this stage. She's 14 now, and she's wiser than I'll ever be. He smiled. Please welcome Lila Chen. The applause was thunderous. Lila walked out. The lights were bright, but she didn't squint. She'd learned to stand in the light. She reached the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and began. Good morning. She said it in English, then repeated it in French. Bonjour, in Japanese. Ohayo gozaimasu, in Italian. Buongiorno, in Spanish. Buenos dias. The crowd erupted in applause. Lila smiled. A year ago, I was invisible. Today I'm standing in front of 2,000 people, but I'm not here to talk about me. She let the silence settle. I'm here to talk about the millions of people who are still invisible. The cleaners, the drivers, the cooks, the workers who keep our buildings running, our offices clean, our lives comfortable. People like my mother. Evelyn sat in the front row, tears already streaming. These people speak languages too. Not always the ones we learn in school, but the language of resilience, of sacrifice, of hope. Lila's voice grew stronger. This past year, the Global Voices Initiative has taught over 50,000 people how to communicate across cultures. But we didn't just teach grammar. We taught listening, empathy, respect. She clicked a remote. A screen behind her lit up with statistics. 92% of participants reported better relationships at work. 87% said they felt more connected to their communities. But the number that matters most is this one. A new slide appeared, 100%. 100% said they finally felt heard. The room was silent. That's what language is really for. Not to impress people, not to prove you're smart, but to make someone feel like they matter. She switched languages seamlessly, repeating the same sentiment in French, then Japanese, then Italian, then Spanish. Each time a section of the audience responded with emotional applause. Then Lila did something no one expected. She stopped speaking. She raised her hands and began using sign language. Thank you for listening. Her hands moved with grace and precision. Even in silence, we can be heard. The room exploded. People rose to their feet. Applause echoed off the walls. Some wiped tears. Others simply stared in awe. Lila stood at the center of it, all hands at her sides, a slight smile on her face. When the applause finally faded, she spoke one last time. My grandfather left me a notebook. Inside he wrote, "Language is a bridge, not a weapon." I used to think that meant words. But now I understand. The real bridge is listening. The real language is care. She bowed slightly. Thank you for letting me share his voice with you. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Backstage, Evelyn wrapped her daughter in her arms. You did it. You really did it. Lila hugged her mother tight. We did it, Mom. Together. Charles approached, his eyes misty. You've built something extraordinary, Lila. 50,000 people is just the beginning. Lila looked up at him. Then let's reach 50 million. He laughed. Deal. As they walked out into the Geneva sunlight, Lila thought about the small room beside the laundry facility. The flickering bulb. The worn notebook. How far she'd come. How much further she wanted to go. Because the world was full of people who needed to be heard. And she was just getting started. 6 months after Geneva, Lila sat in their new apartment. It wasn't large, but it had windows that faced the sunrise, a kitchen table where they ate together, a bookshelf filled with language texts and her grandfather's notebook. Home. Evelyn hummed softly in the kitchen, making tea. The sound filled the space with warmth. Lila opened the old notebook. The pages were worn thin from use. Some corners had torn. But her grandfather's handwriting remained clear, strong, permanent. She traced the words on the first page. Language is a bridge, not a weapon. Below it, she'd added her own note in careful script, and listening is the foundation. Her phone buzzed. An email from Charles. Subject, we're launching in 20 more countries. She smiled. Opened it. Lila, the board approved expansion into Central America, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. We're training 500 new instructors. All because you showed us what real communication looks like. Thank you for teaching an old man new tricks. Charles. She typed back, let's make the world listen. Evelyn set down 2 cups of tea, sat beside her daughter. Good news. Always, Lila said. They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when 2 people understand each other completely. Outside, the city moved. Cars honked. People rushed. The world turned. But in this small apartment, time slowed. Do you think Grandpa knows? Lila asked quietly. Evelyn smiled. I think he's been watching every step. Probably grinning that stubborn grin of his. Lila laughed softly. He'd say I talk too much now. No. Evelyn shook her head. He'd say you're finally using your voice the way he always knew you would. Lila closed the notebook, held it against her chest. I'm not done yet, Mom. I know, sweetheart. You're just getting started. Through the window, the sun broke over the horizon. Golden light spilled into the room, illuminating the worn notebook, the steaming tea, the faces of 2 women who had survived invisibility and found their voices. Lila thought about the girl she used to be. Hiding in stairwells, studying by flickering light, invisible to everyone but her mother. That girl was still there, still quiet, still listening. But now when she spoke, the world leaned in. Not because she was loud, not because she demanded attention, but because she had learned the one truth her grandfather had always known. The most powerful voice is the one that makes others feel heard. And in a world full of noise, that was the quietest victory of all.